The baby's scream cut through $12 million of silence like a blade through skin. Jaxon DeVante didn't flinch. He never flinched. Men who controlled the East Coast didn't show weakness at board tables during federal raids or when bullets shattered restaurant windows 3 blocks from Wall Street. But his son, 4 months old, face crimson, fists trembling, was breaking apart in his arms, and every weapon Jaxon owned meant nothing. The Gulfstream's cabin hummed with filtered air and suppressed panic. Black leather seats, bulletproof glass, security personnel trained to end threats in under 4 seconds. None of it mattered. The child gasped between screams, tiny chest heaving like he'd forgotten how to breathe. "Sir," the flight nurse hovered near his elbow, syringe prepared. "I can administer." "No," Jackson's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. The nurse stepped back immediately, hands dropping to her sides. 6 hours left to Zurich. No diversions, no emergency landings that would put his location on every federal watchlist from here to Moscow. The convoy waiting in Switzerland had already been paid, treaties had been signed, blood debts settled. Turning back wasn't strategy, it was suicide. Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Jaxon shifted the baby against his chest, one hand supporting the fragile skull. He'd held guns steadier than this. Grenades, detonators wired to collapse entire buildings. But this weight, 7 pounds of screaming biology, made his hands uncertain. Across the cabin, his second-in-command pretended to read encrypted files. Terrence hadn't looked up once. Smart man, when an alpha like Jaxon DeVante failed at something this basic, you didn't witness it. You didn't acknowledge the cracks forming in a man who'd built an empire by never showing them. The baby screamed harder. Jaxon tried the bottle again. Formula dripped down the infant's chin, rejected. The custom blanket stitched with the DeVante crest in gold thread got kicked aside. Even the white noise app some tech analyst had sworn would work did nothing except add static to the chaos. "Maybe he's sick," the co-pilot's voice crackled through the intercom, hesitant, careful. "We could." "He's not sick," Jackson's jaw tightened. He'd had the boy checked by 3 pediatricians before boarding, clean bill of health, no fever, no infection, just fear pouring out of a body too small to understand it wasn't dying. The scream fractured into something worse, a whimper, a gasping, desperate sound that made Jackson's alpha instincts roar with failure. Then the baby turned his head. Not toward the window, not toward the nurse still clutching her medical bag like a shield, toward the back of the cabin. Toward the private section past the partition where passengers who paid extra for discretion sat in soundproofed isolation. The infant's unfocused eyes searched, cries shifting pitch, still distressed but different now, directional, calling for something Jaxon couldn't see. A scent hit him. Faint, sweet, barely there beneath recycled oxygen and leather cleaner. Omega. Jackson's vision sharpened. His pulse didn't spike, it slowed, predator instinct replacing confusion. He scanned the cabin with the same precision he used to identify exits, weapons, threats. No Omega had boarded this jet. He'd checked the manifest himself, cleared every passenger, approved every identity, his plane, his rules, his control. So why was his son reaching toward a scent that shouldn't exist? Terrence finally looked up. Their eyes met. 1 second of silent communication. Terrence's hand drifted toward his concealed holster, movement barely perceptible. Jaxon stood slowly, the baby still crying in his arms, and turned toward the partition. "Scan the back section," he said quietly. "Now." The baby screamed again, then stretched tiny hands forward like he was drowning and someone just threw him a rope. Who's hiding on Jackson's plane, and why does his baby seem to recognize them? Casimir Ellison stopped breathing the second the baby's cries changed direction. His hands locked over his stomach, 8 months swollen, pressing against the hoodie he'd stolen from a Goodwill in Newark. The fabric stretched tight, too tight, obvious to anyone who looked close enough, but no one had looked, not during boarding, not when he'd handed over the fake passport, not when he'd walked past armed men who would have ended him if they knew what he was. The scent blockers burned against his neck. Medical-grade adhesive patches layered 3 deep, strong enough to hide Omega pheromones from alphas in close quarters. He'd paid 2 months of saved cash for them. They were supposed to last 12 hours. They were failing. Casimir could feel it. the heat creeping through synthetic layers, sweat breaking the adhesive seal, his body responding to something it shouldn't respond to because he wasn't supposed to be here, wasn't supposed to exist, wasn't supposed to still be breathing after what they'd done. The baby screamed again. Pain shot through Casimir's chest, not emotional pain, biological milk letdown, his body preparing to nurse a child it thought was dying nearby. Instinct overriding logic, safety, survival. He bit down on his tongue hard enough to taste copper, forced his breathing shallow, quiet, invisible, the same way he'd survived the last 6 months by erasing himself so completely that even his own reflection felt like a stranger. But the baby kept calling. Casimir's fingers dug into his thighs. He couldn't look up, couldn't risk making eye contact with anyone. The private section of the jet had 4 other passengers, a businessman scrolling his tablet, an older woman asleep with a silk mask over her eyes, 2 men in suits who hadn't moved since takeoff. None of them had noticed him yet. He kept his hood up, head down, posture folded inward like prey hopping the predator would choose someone else. His burner phone sat in his pocket but he couldn't check it. Movement drew attention, even small movement. He'd learned that the hard way. The flight attendant passed his row without stopping. Good, invisible, safe. Then the baby's pitch spiked into something raw and animal, pure distress, and Casimir's body responded before his brain could stop it. His milk let down hard, wetness spreading across his chest beneath layers of stolen fabric. The kind of biological response no amount of willpower could suppress because nature didn't care about survival strategies. It only cared about a crying infant that his body recognized even when his mind refused to believe it. Casimir pressed his palm flat against his sternum, trying to physically stop what was happening. His pulse hammered against his ribs. This wasn't possible. The baby was dead, the doctors had told him, signed papers, handed him pamphlets about grief counseling and showed him the empty incubator with clinical efficiency. He'd believed them because the alternative, that they'd lied, that someone had taken his child, that the betrayal went deeper than exile, was too big to survive. But that cry. Casimir knew that cry. He'd heard it in his dreams for months, the phantom sound of a child he'd never gotten to hold, a grief so heavy he'd stopped sleeping, stopped eating, stopped caring whether he lived past the next intersection. And now it was real. His lips moved soundlessly, forming a name he hadn't spoken aloud since the night they'd cast him out. Elijah. The baby screamed again, and this time Casimir heard it change, not stopping, not calming, but shifting, like the infant had found what it was searching for and was demanding it come closer. Casimir's hands shook. He couldn't stand, couldn't move, couldn't let them see him because the second they did, it was over. Jaxon DeVante didn't forgive, didn't reconsider. He'd already decided Casimir was guilty, and men like Jaxon didn't reverse judgment, they executed it. But the baby's cry shattered into something desperate. Calling. Begging. And Casimir's body answered with a flood of oxytocin and terror because somewhere in the front of this jet, his son was alive and screaming for him. Does Casimir risk everything to respond, or stay hidden and let his baby suffer? Jackson's hand hovered over the partition door. The scent was stronger now, unmistakable, sweet almond and something floral, lavender maybe, bleeding through whatever chemical suppressant was failing under pressure. His alpha instincts flared hot and immediate, territorial, protective, aggressive. There was an omega on his plane. Hiding. His jaw clenched. Terrence moved into position behind him, silent and ready. 2 more security personnel shifted toward the back exits, blocking escape routes without being told. They'd worked together long enough that commands were unnecessary. Jackson's body language communicated everything. The baby twisted in his arms. Little fingers grasping at air toward the partition, still crying but different now, focused, desperate, like he could sense what Jaxon was about to uncover. Jaxon pushed the door open. The private section was dim, cabin lights lowered for passengers who'd paid extra for privacy, 4 people, none of them moving, none of them looking up. Except one. Hooded figure, back row, hands locked over a stomach that was too round to hide beneath oversized fabric, shoulders hunched, head down, trembling. Jackson's vision tunneled. Every instinct in his body fired at once. threat assessment, danger analysis, vulnerability identification, but underneath all of it something older and more primal. Recognition. His alpha hindbrain knew that scent. Stand, the command rolled out low and absolute, no room for negotiation, no space for refusal. The hooded figure didn't move. Jaxon took one step forward, the baby reached harder, tiny arms straining, crying escalating again but now with frustration not fear, like he was so close to what he needed and couldn't understand why it wasn't coming to him. I won't ask twice. Terrence's hand moved toward his weapon, slow, controlled. The businessman across the aisle finally looked up, eyes widening, smart enough to stay silent. The Omega stood. Slowly, carefully, hands still locked over his belly like he was shielding something infinitely fragile. The hood fell back. Jaxon stopped breathing. Dark skin, sharp cheekbones, eyes that used to meet his without flinching back when trust was currency and loyalty wasn't a lie. Casimir Ellison, alive, pregnant, staring at him with an expression that mixed terror and fury in equal measure. Dead. The word echoed in Jackson's skull. Casimir was supposed to be dead. The reports had confirmed it. Asset eliminated, threat neutralized. He'd signed off on closing the file himself. But here he was, breathing, shaking, very much alive. And 8 months pregnant. Jackson's gaze dropped to Casimir's stomach, then snapped back to his face. Math didn't lie, timeline didn't lie. 8 months ago, Casimir had still been part of his world, still trusted, still. The baby screamed. Casimir flinched like he'd been struck. His hands moved instinctively toward the sound before he forced them back down, physical restraint fighting biological imperative. You're dead, Jackson's voice came out flat, controlled, betraying nothing of the chaos ripping through his chest. They told you that so you wouldn't look for me, Casimir's voice shook but didn't break. Same way they told me my baby didn't survive. The cabin pressure seemed to drop. Jackson's gaze moved between Casimir and the screaming infant in his arms, connections forming too fast to process, too devastating to accept. This isn't, he stopped, restarted, you betrayed. I didn't, Casimir's voice cracked on the words, and you know I didn't, you just needed someone to blame and I was easy. The baby reached again, tiny hands opening and closing, crying harder now, frantic, pleading sounds that made Jackson's chest feel like it was collapsing inward. Then something impossible happened. The infant turned fully toward Casimir, eyes still unfocused but locked on target, and he stopped screaming just long enough to make a sound Jaxon had never heard before. A soft, hopeful. Calling. Casimir took one step forward before Terrence moved to block him. Don't! Jackson's command stopped everyone. He stared at Casimir, mind racing through evidence timelines, lies that suddenly felt like quicksand beneath his feet. The convoy, the ambush, your accounts. Were hacked. Casimir's hands shook against his stomach. Messages forged, bank transfers faked. You think I'm smart enough to steal from you and dumb enough to leave a trail? Jackson's pulse thundered in his ears. The baby screamed again, louder, more desperate, and this time he didn't just reach. He tried to lunge out of Jackson's arms toward Casimir. Jaxon tightened his grip instinctively and the infant howled with betrayal, pure, heartbroken sound that made every alpha in the cabin tense with discomfort. Casimir's scent blockers gave up completely. The smell hit like a shockwave, sweet and warm and familiar and undeniably Omega, undeniably distressed, undeniably nursing. Jaxon saw the wetness spreading across Casimir's chest, saw the way his body was responding to the baby's cries with biological certainty, saw the truth he'd been too blinded by rage and fear to recognize 6 months ago. He's yours, Casimir whispered, tears streaming now, and you gave him to someone else. Will Jaxon believe the Omega he exiled, or trust the people who convinced him to destroy everything? 6 months earlier, Casimir had believed in safety. Stupid, naive, suicidal in hindsight, but back then trust hadn't felt like a luxury, it felt like oxygen, the kind of thing you didn't question until someone ripped it away and watched you suffocate. He'd been standing in Jackson's office, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan, steel desk, encrypted monitors cycling through global transactions, the empire's nerve center, A place Casimir had been welcome for 2 years because he was good at what he did: logistics, communications, the quiet systems that kept illegal operations running clean. Jaxon trusted him. Past tense? That trust died at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday when 3 men bled out on a Baltimore dock and every piece of evidence pointed directly at Casimir's digital fingerprints. "Explain," Jaxon hadn't yelled, he never yelled, his voice stayed level, clinical, the same tone he used when ordering executions. Casimir's hands had been shaking, he'd pressed them flat against his thighs to hide it. "I didn't do this." "Your access codes opened the encrypted root files." Jaxon held up a tablet, transaction logs, timestamps, digital proof that looked irrefutable. "Your accounts received the payments." "I've never seen those accounts," Casimir's voice cracked. "Someone's setting me up." "Who?" "I don't know." "Wrong answer." Jackson's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes went cold, dead, the way he looked at problems that needed eliminating. Casimir had taken a step forward. Mistake. Security moved immediately, hands on weapons. "I'm pregnant." The words came out desperate, unplanned, but true. 8 weeks confirmed. Jackson's child growing inside him while the alpha stared at him like he was already a corpse. Jackson's jaw tightened. "That doesn't change what you did." "I didn't." 24 hours? Jaxon turned away. "Dismissal, final. Disappear. If you're still in the city after that, you're a liability I'll handle permanently." Casimir had stood there, frozen, waiting for Jaxon to turn back, to look at him, to see him, to remember 2 years of loyalty and late nights and trust that Casimir had never once violated. But Jaxon kept his back turned. And Casimir learned that love without proof was just another word for expendable. He'd fled with a backpack, $300 cash, a burner phone, and a pregnancy that made every step harder, every breath more terrifying, every moment a countdown to something he couldn't afford to name. Jersey motels, cash-only transactions, fake names, hair dye, baggy clothes. He'd erased himself so completely that even his own reflection felt like a stranger's. The baby grew anyway. Casimir's body didn't care about survival strategies. It just kept building life inside him while the world outside tried to destroy what was left. He found work washing dishes, cleaning offices at night, jobs that didn't check references or ask questions, the kind of work that paid under the table and didn't notice when he disappeared for prenatal visits at free clinics. 4 months in, he started bleeding. Not much, just spotting, but enough to send him to an emergency room at 2 a.m., terrified and alone, clutching a stomach that had become the only thing in his life worth protecting. The doctor had been kind. Older woman, calm hands. She'd done the ultrasound herself, gel cold against Casimir's skin, wand pressing gently while she stared at the monitor. "There's no heartbeat," she'd said quietly. "I'm sorry." Casimir had stopped hearing after that. Words became noise, comfort became static. They'd handed him pamphlets, scheduled a follow-up, explained medical procedures with clinical efficiency. He'd signed the papers because what else was there to do? They told him the baby was gone, and Casimir had believed them because believing was easier than breaking completely. He'd left the hospital empty, not just physically, existentially, like someone had scooped out everything that mattered and left only the mechanics of breathing. 3 weeks later, he delivered. Alone, motel bathroom, no drugs, no support, just pain that felt like punishment. They'd taken the baby immediately, standard procedure. They said he never saw the body, never held what he'd lost, they just removed it, efficient, clean, final. Casimir had stayed in that motel room for 6 days without moving. No food, no water, just waiting for his body to finish what grief had started. But it didn't. He kept breathing. And eventually, survival instinct forced him upright, forced him to move, to find new work, new shelter, new ways to disappear. Until today. Until a private jet and a baby's scream that his body recognized even when his mind refused to believe it was possible. What if everything Casimir was told was a lie, and his baby had been alive this whole time? Casimir couldn't look away from the baby. Every scream felt like a fishhook buried in his chest, pulling him forward against every survival instinct screaming to stay back. His hands trembled at his sides, milk soaking through stolen fabric, body betraying him with biological certainty that this child, this screaming, reaching infant, was his. Jaxon hadn't moved, still holding the baby, still staring at Casimir like he was trying to reconcile a ghost with a living, breathing Omega who just shattered 6 months of carefully constructed reality. Security filled the narrow aisle, 3 men, armed, ready, waiting for Jackson's signal to end this however he commanded. The baby screamed harder. Casimir took 1 step forward. "Stop!" Jackson's alpha command rolled through the cabin, irresistible, biological imperative coded into Omega DNA to freeze, submit, obey. Casimir took another step. Jackson's eyes widened fractionally, shock breaking through control because Omegas didn't resist alpha commands, not without severe consequences, not without breaking something fundamental in the hierarchy that kept their world functioning. But Casimir's body didn't care about hierarchy anymore. His body only cared about the infant howling like it was dying. "He's mine," Casimir's voice shook but didn't break. "You can kill me after, but right now he needs me and I'm not letting him suffer because you're too afraid to admit you were wrong." Terrence moved to block him, hand on his weapon, professional, efficient. The baby went silent for exactly 3 seconds, then screamed so loud it sounded like physical pain. Jaxon flinched. Casimir saw it, the crack in the armor, the moment when an alpha who'd built an empire on control realized he was helpless against biology. "Please," Casimir's voice broke, "he's hurting." The words hung in recycled air, true, undeniable, the kind of truth that didn't need evidence because everyone in the cabin could hear it. Jaxon looked down at the baby in his arms, at the tiny fists shaking, the red face, the gasping, desperate cries that had been going on for hours with no relief. Then he looked at Casimir. "If you're lying." "I'm not." Casimir stepped closer, close enough now that Terrence could grab him if ordered, close enough that Jaxon could end this with 1 word, "And you know I'm not." The baby reached, little hands straining toward Casimir, crying fragmenting into heartbroken whimpers. Jackson's grip tightened on the infant, possessive, protective, every alpha instinct screaming not to hand over something this vulnerable to a threat. But Casimir wasn't a threat. He was an Omega standing in an aisle, pregnant and shaking, asking to comfort a baby that biology insisted was his. "1 minute," Jaxon said quietly. "You get 1 minute. If he doesn't calm down, this ends." He held out the baby. Casimir's hands moved before his brain processed permission. Careful, gentle, supporting the fragile skull the way his body remembered even though his mind insisted this wasn't possible. The moment the baby touched Casimir's chest, everything stopped. The crying cut off mid-scream, little body going limp with relief, tiny fists curling into Casimir's hoodie, face pressing against fabric soaked with milk, breathing evening out into soft, exhausted huffs. Silence. Complete, devastating, undeniable. The entire cabin exhaled. Casimir's legs gave out, he sank into the nearest seat cradling the baby against his chest, tears streaming silently because this was real. This was Elijah, his son, alive, breathing, perfect. Jaxon stood frozen in the aisle, staring at the proof he couldn't argue with. Biology didn't lie, instinct didn't fake recognition. His son had just chosen an Omega he'd supposedly never met over the alpha who'd been holding him for hours. "They told me he was dead." Casimir's voice barely registered above the engine hum, "showed me papers, made me sign documents, I believed them." "Who?" Jackson's voice came out rough, strained. "I don't know." Casimir looked up, met Jackson's eyes for the first time since boarding. "But whoever did this wanted me gone and your son somewhere you'd never find the connection." The baby made a soft sound, content, safe, already drifting toward sleep against Casimir's chest. Jaxon crouched slowly, eye level now, close enough to catch the full force of Casimir's scent, no longer hidden, no longer suppressible. Omega, nursing, undeniably bonded to the child between them. "If you're telling the truth," Jaxon started. "Then someone in your organization stole your son, faked my baby's death and framed me for treason to cover it up." Casimir finished. Yeah, that's exactly what happened. Jackson's expression went cold, not angry, colder, the kind of cold that preceded calculated violence. He stood, turned to Terrence, pull the hospital records, every document related to Casimir's delivery, every signature, every witness. Sir. Now. Terrence moved immediately, phone out, already dialing. Jackson looked back at Casimir, at the baby sleeping against his chest, at the Omega he'd exiled 6 months ago who'd just proven everything Jackson thought he knew was a lie. If someone took him from you, Jackson's jaw clenched, they declared war. The plane began its descent. And somewhere on the ground, the person who'd orchestrated 6 months of carefully constructed lies felt their world start to fracture. Who stole Jackson's son, and what will they do when they realize he's been found? The baby's breathing changed first. Shallow huffs softening into the deep, rhythmic pull of real sleep. Elijah's tiny fists uncurled against Casimir's chest, fingers relaxing their death grip on stolen fabric. His face, red and swollen from hours of screaming, smoothed into something peaceful, trusting. Casimir didn't move, couldn't. His entire body had locked around the infant like moving might shatter whatever miracle had just occurred. Tears dripped off his jaw onto Elijah's dark curls, but he didn't wipe them away. Didn't care who saw, didn't care about anything except the weight in his arms that proved 6 months of grief had been built on lies. Jackson stood 3 feet away, close enough to hear every soft breath, close enough to see the way Elijah's body had melted into Casimir's like finding home after being lost. Recognition. Not learned, not conditioned, biological. The kind of bond that formed in the womb and didn't care about paperwork, distance, or manufactured death certificates. Jackson's hands curled into fists at his sides. His alpha instincts were at war, territorial rage battling paternal relief. Someone had stolen this, stolen months of his son knowing safety, stolen Casimir's right to hold his own child, stolen trust and replaced it with a lie so massive it had nearly cost both of them everything. He knows you, Jackson's voice came out rough, strained, like the words were being dragged through broken glass. Casimir looked up, eyes red, face wet but steady. Biology doesn't forget. Silence stretched between them, heavy, loaded with 6 months of accusations, exile, survival, and a screaming infant who'd just proven every assumption wrong. Terrence appeared in the aisle, phone still pressed to his ear, expression carefully neutral but his jaw was tight, bad news wearing a professional mask. The hospital records were sealed, Terrence said quietly. Emergency court order, signed by Judge Marlowe 3 days after the delivery. Jackson's eyes went cold. Marlowe's been on our payroll for 5 years. Not anymore, Terrence's grip tightened on his phone. His accounts were cleaned out 2 weeks ago, transferred offshore, he disappeared yesterday. Casimir's stomach dropped. Judge Marlowe, the name hit like a fist to the chest because he remembered that name, remembered seeing it on documents he'd processed months before everything burned. Contracts, route approvals, encrypted files that required judicial sign-off to move certain shipments through legal channels. He had access, Casimir whispered, to everything, communications, financial routes, my security codes. Jackson's attention snapped back to him, predator focus, what? The convoy ambush, Casimir shifted Elijah carefully, keeping his voice low so he wouldn't wake the baby. The evidence pointing to me, it wasn't hacked, it was inside access, someone who knew exactly which codes to use, which accounts to forge, which trails to leave. Terrence moved closer. Marlowe processed your background clearance when you started. The pieces fell together with sickening clarity. Judge Marlowe had access to everything. Legal authority to seal records, forge documents, issue emergency orders that wouldn't be questioned. He could have orchestrated the entire frame, ambush, evidence, exile, while simultaneously arranging for Casimir's baby to be declared dead and quietly relocated. But why? Who benefits from me being gone? Casimir asked. Who moves up if your son disappears and I'm erased? Jackson's expression shifted, calculation replacing rage. His empire wasn't just about territory, it was about succession, about heirs and bloodlines and who controlled what happened after he was gone. My brother, Jackson said flatly, Dante. The cabin pressure dropped. Casimir had met Jaxon DeVante exactly twice. Smooth, Charming, the kind of alpha who smiled while plotting 3 moves ahead. He'd congratulated Casimir on his pregnancy with perfect sincerity, then asked pointed questions about medical care, hospital choices, delivery plans. Information gathering disguised as concern. "If I'm exiled and your son is declared dead," Casimir's voice shook, "Dante's the only heir." "Not anymore?" Jaxon reached down, one hand hovering over Elijah's sleeping form, not taking him, just touching, confirming, claiming, "He's alive, you're alive," which means Dante's plan just collapsed. Terrence's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, then looked at Jaxon with an expression that made Casimir's blood run cold. "Sir, Dante's at the Zurich airfield, waiting for our arrival." Jaxon didn't react, didn't tense, didn't show anything except the kind of stillness that preceded violence. "How many men?" 12, maybe more." Casimir's arms tightened around Elijah. "He can't know we're together if he realizes you've found us. He'll try to finish what he started." Jackson's jaw clenched, "which means we don't land in Zurich." Terrence was already moving toward the cockpit. "I'll reroute." "No," Jackson's command stopped him. "We land exactly as planned, but Casimir and Elijah don't leave the jet." Casimir's pulse spiked. "You're walking into a trap." "I'm walking into a conversation." Jackson's eyes locked onto his. "Dante thinks he's won, let him believe it while we figure out who else is involved. And if he tries to kill you?" Jaxon smiled, not warm, not reassuring, the kind of smile that reminded Casimir exactly why this man controlled half the East Coast. "Then we'll know for certain." Elijah stirred against Casimir's chest, a soft whimper, not distressed, just shifting in sleep. Casimir looked down at his son, at the face he'd been told he'd never see, at the life someone had tried to erase like it meant nothing. "I want him gone," Casimir said quietly. "Whoever did this, I want them destroyed." Jaxon crouched again, eye level, close enough that Casimir could see the rage burning beneath controlled calm. "They will be," Jaxon promised, "but first I need you to trust me one more time." Trust, the word felt like swallowing glass, but Casimir looked at the baby sleeping peacefully for the first time in hours and realized he didn't have a choice. "One more time," Casimir agreed. The jet began its descent toward Zurich. And on the ground, Dante DeVante checked his watch and smiled, unaware that the ghost he'd tried to bury was about to rip his entire plan apart. Will Jackson's plan work, or is he walking straight into his brother's trap? Jaxon stepped onto the tarmac at exactly 6:47 a.m. No hesitation, no backward glance at the jet where Casimir and Elijah remained hidden behind locked doors and armed security. He walked like a man who owned the air itself, flanked by Terrence and 2 others whose hands stayed near concealed weapons. Dante was waiting by a black SUV. Tailored suit, easy smile, arms open in greeting like this was a family reunion instead of a confrontation between 2 alphas who'd been circling each other for years. "Brother," Dante's voice carried across cold Swiss morning air, warm, welcoming, fake, successful trip. Jaxon didn't return the smile, productive. They clasped hands. Dante's grip lasted half a second too long, testing, searching for weakness or hesitation or some crack in Jackson's armor that would confirm suspicions. Jaxon gave him nothing. "Where's your son?" Dante asked, casual, like the question was afterthought instead of the entire reason he'd flown 6,000 miles. "Sleeping," Jaxon released Dante's hand. "Finally," kid screamed for 6 hours straight. Dante's expression flickered, surprise, concern, but underneath calculation. "You should have called me. I know a pediatrician in Manhattan who specializes in—" "He's fine now?" Jaxon started toward the SUV, forcing Dante to follow, taking control of the conversation through movement and dismissal. "Let's talk about why you're really here." Dante's smile tightened fractionally. "Can a brother check in?" Not when that brother's been liquidating offshore accounts and meeting with Judge Marlowe behind closed doors. The air between them crystallized. Dante stopped walking, his easy charm evaporated like steam off concrete. "You've been watching me." "Always." Jaxon turned slowly, predator facing prey. "Question is, who else have you been talking to?" Dante's hand moved toward his jacket, slow, deliberate. Terrence's weapon cleared leather first, Barrel aimed center mass, professional, efficient. Dante froze, both hands visible now, empty, but his eyes burned with something ugly and desperate. This was supposed to be clean, Dante said quietly. You were supposed to grieve, move on, hand over succession when the time came. By killing my son. By making sure your son never existed. Dante's voice stayed level, cold. You chose an omega over bloodline purity, over tradition. Father would have disowned you for it. Jackson's hands curled into fists. Father's dead, I'm not. Not yet. The threat hung between them, clear, undeniable. Jaxon took one step forward, close enough now that Dante had to look up slightly to meet his eyes. Close enough that the height difference, the age difference, the power difference became physically obvious. Where's Marlowe? Jaxon asked. Gone. Where's the Omega? Dante's expression shifted, confusion breaking through rage. Dead, you exiled him yourself 6 months ago. Try again. He delivered at Metropolitan Grace, complications, baby didn't survive, hospital filed the death certificate, I saw the paperwork myself. Dante's voice rose slightly, defensive. It's done, finished, you're free to. He's alive, Jaxon interrupted. Both of them, and right now they're on my jet with enough evidence to bury everyone involved. Dante's face went white. Behind him, 2 of his men shifted positions, hands moving toward weapons. Fight or flight instinct kicking in when trapped animals realized escape wasn't possible. Terrence's team moved in response, 4 against 12, bad odds, but Jaxon hadn't survived 15 years in this business by backing down from bad odds. You can't prove anything, Dante said, but his voice shook now, certainty crumbling. I don't need to prove it, Jackson's voice dropped to something lethal. I just need to find everyone who helped you, and I will, starting with whoever signed the forged death certificate, then the doctor who lied about complications, then the nurse who took my son and handed him over like he was cargo. Dante's jaw clenched. They'll disappear before you find them. Then I'll find their families, their friends, everyone they've ever loved, and I'll make sure they understand exactly what happens when someone steals from me. Silence stretched across the tarmac. Cold, heavy, loaded with the promise of violence that didn't need theatrics to be believed. Dante's hands trembled. This was business, nothing personal. You tried to erase my son, Jaxon leaned closer. That's as personal as it gets. Dante's phone buzzed. He glanced down reflexively, screen lit with an incoming message, just 2 words visible before he locked it again. Package secured. Jaxon saw it, read it, felt his blood turn to ice. What package? His voice stayed level, but alpha command bled through, irresistible, biological imperative demanding truth. Dante smiled, broken, desperate, the smile of a man who'd already lost but planned to take everyone down with him. You think I'd come here without insurance? Your Omega's not the only one who can disappear. Jackson's world tilted. Casimir, Elijah still on the jet, behind locked doors he'd thought were safe. He turned and ran. Terrence was already moving, phone out, shouting into it. Secure the jet, nobody on or off now. The distance between SUV and jet stretched impossibly long. Jackson's legs burned, his lungs screamed. But he didn't slow because the alternative, arriving too late, finding them gone, losing them again, wasn't survivable. The jet's door hung open. Security lay crumpled on the tarmac, not dead, tranquilized, professional extraction. Jaxon hit the stairs at full speed, burst through the cabin door. Empty. Seats vacant, privacy partition hanging loose. No Casimir, no Elijah, no sign except a piece of fabric torn from Casimir's stolen hoodie, dropped deliberately where Jaxon would find it. And underneath, 3 words written in shaky handwriting. Dante isn't alone. Who else is involved in the conspiracy, and can Jaxon find them before it's too late? Casimir's head throbbed where they'd hit him. Not hard enough to knock him unconscious, just enough to disorient. Enough to make his vision swim while hands dragged him across tarmac toward a vehicle he couldn't identify through blurred sight and panic. Elijah was screaming again. Different person holding him now, rough, careless, the baby's cries escalating from distress into pure terror. Casimir tried to fight, tried to twist free, But his pregnant body moved too slowly, balance thrown off by 8 months of weight that made him clumsy when he needed to be fast. "Careful with that one," a woman's voice, crisp, professional. "He's worth more intact." Worth more, like Casimir was cargo, product, something to be traded instead of a person fighting for his child. They shoved him into a van, industrial, no windows in back, metal floor, zip ties cutting into his wrists before he could resist. Elijah screamed harder. Casimir's body responded with painful intensity, milk letting down, chest aching, every biological instinct demanding he get to his baby and make the crying stop. "Sedate the infant," the woman again, giving orders with the casual authority of someone used to being obeyed. "No," Casimir's voice came out hoarse, desperate. "Don't, please, he just needs to be held, he's scared, please don't." A hand struck him across the face, not brutal, corrective, the kind of hit designed to shut someone up without damaging valuable merchandise. "You don't speak unless asked a question." Casimir tasted blood, swallowed it, forced himself to stay quiet even as Elijah's screams tore through him like physical wounds. The van door slammed shut, engine started, movement. Casimir counted seconds, tried to track turns, left, right, straight for maybe 3 minutes, another right. His sense of direction was garbage, but he tried anyway because doing nothing felt like dying. Elijah's cries weakened, not because he'd calmed down, because he was exhausting himself. Little voice going raspy, breaths hitching with the kind of distress that preceded complete breakdown. "How much did you give him?" A male voice, younger, nervous. "Standard infant dose," the woman unbothered. "He'll be quiet in 2 minutes." Casimir's vision cleared enough to see her now. Tall, dark skin, professional attire, she looked like a lawyer or executive, someone who belonged in boardrooms, not kidnapping vans. "Who are you?" Casimir asked, voice shaking but clear. She glanced at him, evaluated, decided he was worth answering. "Someone who's been cleaning up Jaxon DeVante's mistakes for 3 years." "You work for Dante." "Worked," she smiled, cold, past tense. He was useful until he got sloppy. Elijah's crying cut off abruptly. The sudden silence was worse than screaming. Casimir lurched forward against his restraints. "What did you do to him?" "Relax, he's sleeping." She checked her watch. "And in 4 hours he'll be on a plane to Singapore with new papers, new identity, new parents who paid very well for a healthy infant." The words didn't process at first, too massive, too impossible. Then they hit. "You're selling him," Casimir's voice came out flat, hollow. "You're selling my son." "Your son doesn't exist. According to every legal document, he died 6 months ago, which makes him perfect inventory." She leaned back against the van wall. "High-demand product, alpha genetics, healthy, no paper trail, buyers are already lined up." Casimir's stomach twisted. "Jaxon will kill you." Jaxon DeVante thinks his brother is the threat. By the time he realizes the operation goes deeper, we'll be offshore with enough money to disappear permanently. The van hit a bump, Casimir's head struck metal, stars burst across his vision. "What about me?" he asked. "What am I worth?" She studied him, calculating. "Pregnant Omega, proven fertility, strong genetics. You're worth more than the infant if we play it right." Horror crawled up Casimir's spine. They weren't just taking Elijah. They were planning to sell Casimir too, breed him like livestock, use his body to produce more inventory for their operation. "How many?" Casimir whispered. "How many have you done this to?" Her expression didn't change. "Your number 43. 43 Omegas, 43 stolen children, 43 families destroyed so this woman and whoever she worked with could profit from human trafficking disguised as discreet adoption." The van slowed, turned, stopped. Back doors opened onto an industrial warehouse. Concrete floors, metal shelving, no windows, the kind of space that swallowed sound and didn't show up on property records. They dragged Casimir out, his legs barely held him. Pregnancy made him off balance and the hit to his head left him dizzy. Elijah lay in a carrier nearby, sedated, breathing shallow but steady, alive. "For now. Put the Omega in holding room 3, the woman checked her tablet. "We have 2 potential buyers interested. Let them inspect the merchandise before we finalize anything." "Merchandise?" The word echoed in Casimir's skull while they dragged him toward a door marked with faded paint and a deadbolt that looked military grade. He had maybe 6 hours before Elijah was gone forever. Maybe less before someone paid to own him. And Jaxon had no idea where they'd been taken. The door slammed shut. Darkness swallowed everything except the sound of his own heartbeat and the memory of Elijah's screams. Can Casimir find a way to escape before both he and Elijah are sold and lost forever? The tracking device was the size of a grain of rice. Jaxon found it embedded in the fabric scrap Casimir had left behind, deliberate, strategic, planted where it would be discovered by someone looking closely enough. Smart, even terrified and being dragged away, Casimir had been thinking 3 moves ahead. Got it. Terrence's tech specialist held up a tablet showing a blinking red dot moving through Zurich's industrial district. Signal strong, they haven't found it yet. Jaxon stared at the screen, at the dot representing everything that mattered compressed into GPS coordinates. How many vehicles? Just one white van, registered to a shell company, same company that owns 3 warehouses in the target area. Send the coordinates to everyone. Jaxon's voice stayed level, clinical, the same tone he used when planning operations that ended with body counts. I want all 3 warehouses surrounded in 10 minutes. Sir, Terrence moved closer. Quiet, we don't know which building they're in if we hit the wrong one first. Then they'll move them, I know. Jaxon's hands curled into fists, which is why we hit all 3 simultaneously. The math was brutal, spread his forces thin, risk getting to the right location too late, but the alternative, choosing wrong, wasting time, arriving to find them already gone, wasn't acceptable. Dante sat zip-tied to a chair in the corner, blood dripping from his nose where Terrence had hit him, but he was smiling, broken teeth and all. You won't make it in time, Dante said. His voice came out wet, damaged. Seleni's been doing this for years, she's too good. Jaxon crossed the cabin in 2 steps, grabbed Dante by the throat, lifted him until the chair's front legs left the floor. Selene who? Graves, Dante choked out the name. Selene Graves, she's the one who really runs everything, I just provided access. The name meant nothing. Jaxon released him, let him crash back down. Where would she take them? I don't know. Jaxon pulled his knife, not threatening, just showing. The blade caught overhead light and turned it into promises of pain. Try harder. Dante's eyes widened. I'm telling the truth, she doesn't trust anyone with locations until the last minute. I just got paid to look the other way. For how long? 3 years. 3 years, 43 victims. An entire operation running beneath Jaxon's empire while he'd been too focused on external threats to see the rot inside his own organization. Terrence's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then looked at Jaxon with an expression that made the air feel thinner. They're moving the Omega, different vehicle, heading toward the airport. Jaxon's world narrowed to that single sentence. Moving toward the airport meant planes, international flights, jurisdictions where his reach didn't extend and money talked louder than violence. What about my son? Terrence hesitated, still at the warehouse. They'd separated them, standard protocol for trafficking operations. Harder to track 2 targets moving in different directions, forced the pursuer to choose. Save the Omega or save the child. Not both. Jaxon's chest felt like it was collapsing inward, because this was the choice Selene Graves had engineered perfectly. Go after Casimir, lose Elijah, go after Elijah, lose Casimir, either way she won. Split the teams, Jaxon's voice came out steady despite the chaos in his skull. Half on the warehouse, half to the airport. We don't have enough people to do it anyway. Terrence moved immediately, phone already dialing, barking orders in 3 languages. Jaxon looked at the tracker signal, at the red dot representing Casimir moving farther away every second, then at the stationary location where his son lay sedated and helpless. The van carrying Casimir turned onto the highway, speed increasing, minutes away from an airport with private terminals and flights that didn't get searched. The warehouse where Elijah remained was 12 minutes in the opposite direction. Jaxon made his choice. I'm going after my son. He grabbed his jacket, checked his weapon. You get Casimir. Sir. That's an order. Terrence's jaw tightened, but he nodded, because in Jackson's world, orders weren't suggestions. The SUV roared out of the hangar. Jackson drove. Terrence navigated. Neither spoke because there was nothing to say that wouldn't make the fear worse. 12 minutes became 10, then 8, GPS recalculating, traffic thick despite the early hour. Jackson's phone rang, unknown number. He answered, put it on speaker. Jaxon DeVante. The voice was female, calm, professional. I believe you're looking for something that belongs to me now. Selene Graves. Where's my son? Jackson's voice stayed level, giving her nothing. Safe for now, but I have a proposal. She paused. Your Omega for your heir, even trade. The SUV swerved. Jackson corrected. You don't have leverage to negotiate. Don't I? Your son's at warehouse B alone except for 2 guards, but your Omega's in my personal vehicle heading toward a plane you'll never reach in time. She laughed, soft, almost sympathetic. You can save one maybe, but not both. I'll kill you. Eventually, but first you'll choose, and I'll get to watch an Alpha King realize money and power can't fix everything. The line went dead. Jackson's hands tightened on the wheel, vision tunneling, every instinct screaming to turn around, to go after Casimir, to save the Omega who'd been fighting alone for 6 months. But Elijah was 4 months old, helpless, drugged, in a warehouse with traffickers who saw him as product. The SUV reached the warehouse district, 3 identical buildings, gray concrete, no markings. Terrence's team hit Building A. Gunfire erupted immediately. Not the right location, just decoys left behind to slow them down. Jackson's vehicle screeched to a halt outside Building B. He didn't wait for backup, didn't plan, just moved. The door exploded inward under his shoulder. 2 guards turned, weapons rising. Jackson was faster. The first guard dropped with a bullet through his knee. The second tried to run. Terrence appeared from nowhere and put him on the ground with brutal efficiency. The warehouse was nearly empty, just metal shelving and concrete and a carrier sitting alone in the center of the floor like bait. Jackson approached slowly, every instinct screaming trap, but he couldn't stop, couldn't leave without knowing. He looked inside. Elijah breathing, sleeping, alive. Jackson's knees nearly gave out. He lifted the carrier with shaking hands, checked his son, no injuries, no harm, just sedation wearing off slowly. His phone rang again. You chose, Selene's voice held satisfaction. Congratulations, you saved your heir. Where's Casimir? 30,000 feet up by now, new identity, new owner, new life where you'll never find him. She paused. But your son's safe, that's what matters, right? The line went dead. Jackson stood in an empty warehouse holding his son while somewhere above the Atlantic, Casimir disappeared into a trafficking network that had been operating under his nose for 3 years. He'd won. And he'd lost. Did Jackson really lose Casimir forever, or is there still a chance to save them both? The plane never took off. Casimir felt it the moment the engines cut, the sudden silence, the pilot's voice crackling over the intercom with professional calm masking panic. Ground crew has requested we return to the terminal. All passengers remain seated. Selene Graves stood immediately, phone already out, dialing. Her expression shifted from confident to concerned in under 3 seconds. What do you mean locked down? Her voice stayed quiet but urgency bled through. Who authorized? She looked at Casimir. Then at the phone. Then back at Casimir with an expression that finally showed cracks in her professional mask. You planted a second tracker, not a question, an accusation. Casimir smiled despite the zip ties cutting into his swollen wrists. You really think I'd only leave one? He'd torn 2 strips from his hoodie, dropped one where Jackson would find it immediately, pressed the second into the palm of a flight attendant during boarding with whispered instructions and the kind of desperate eye contact that made people choose compassion over protocol. Call this number, tell them which plane, tell them to ground it. The attendant had been young, scared, but she'd nodded. And apparently she'd followed through. Selene grabbed Casimir by the throat. Where's the other tracker? Already activated? Casimir's voice came out strangled but clear. You've got maybe 3 minutes before federal agents swarm this terminal. She released him, stepped back, calculating, you're bluffing. Try me. Sirens wailed in the distance, getting closer. Seleni's phone rang, she answered, listened, her face went white, understood. She hung up, looked at Casimir with something like respect mixed with rage. Jaxon DeVante just unfroze 17 international accounts tied to human trafficking networks. Federal warrants were issued for 43 individuals, including Judge Marlowe, 3 hospital administrators, and, she stopped, smiled bitterly, me. Good, Casimir's voice didn't shake, you deserve worse. Probably, she moved toward the emergency exit, but I'm not staying to find out. The cabin door exploded inward. Not federal agents, not airport security. Jaxon. He came through that door like violence personified, gun raised, eyes locked on Selene with the kind of focus that ended with body counts. Behind him, Terrence and 4 others, armed, professional, blocking every exit. Selene raised her hands slowly. This is a commercial flight, witnesses everywhere, you can't. Watch me, Jackson's finger moved toward the trigger. Wait, Casimir's voice cut through tension. There are 43 families who need answers, 43 Omegas who deserve justice. If you kill her now, we'll never find them all. Jackson's aim didn't waver. I don't care about 43, I care about 2. I know, Casimir struggled to his feet, pregnant belly making balance difficult, but they deserve the same chance we got, please. The word hung in recycled cabin air. Please, not a command, not a demand, just a request from an Omega who'd survived 6 months of hell and still chose compassion over revenge. Jackson's finger moved off the trigger. Selene exhaled, smart choice. Don't thank me yet? Jaxon stepped closer. You're going to give us every name, every location, every person involved, and then you're going to disappear into a federal prison where my reach is very, very long. Selene's professional mask cracked completely. For the first time she looked afraid. And if I cooperate? Then you might live long enough to see trial. Terrence moved forward, zip ties in hand. Selene Graves, you're under arrest for. His phone buzzed, he glanced at it, expression shifting. Sir, we found the list. Jackson's attention snapped to him. What list? Approved heirs, just like the Omega said. Terrence held up his tablet. 17 names, all high-ranking, all competing for succession, and every single one of them signed off on Operation Clear Line. Casimir's stomach dropped. Clear Line. Code name for eliminating unapproved bloodlines. Terrence's voice came out flat, disgusted. Your baby wasn't the target, you were. They wanted to make sure Jackson's heir came from acceptable Omega genetics. The words were knives, casual cruelty wrapped in bureaucratic language. Jackson's hand moved back to his weapon. Names now. Terrence rattled off 17 identities, lawyers, judges, 3 senators, 2 corporate executives, and at the bottom of the list, Marcus DeVante, your father. Time stopped. Jackson's expression went completely blank, not shocked, not angry, just empty. My father's been dead for 2 years. Signed 6 months before his death. Terrence zoomed in on the document. Authorized the removal of any heir not meeting bloodline requirements. Casimir watched Jackson's face, watched the moment when he realized the betrayal went deeper than a brother's jealousy, deeper than money or power, all the way down to the man who'd raised him believing family was everything. He knew I chose you, Jaxon said quietly, not to Terrence, to Casimir. He knew I was going to make you my partner, and he decided that was unacceptable. Casimir's chest ached. I'm sorry. Don't be, Jaxon looked at him finally, really looked. He was wrong, they were all wrong. Selene laughed, bitter, broken, touching, but you're both still alive, which means the operation failed. Someone's going to pay for that failure. Yeah, Jaxon holstered his weapon. You. Federal agents poured into the cabin. Real ones this time, badges and paperwork and enough firepower to make even Selene Graves shut up and comply. They took her away in handcuffs. She didn't resist, just stared at Casimir as she passed like she was trying to figure out where her perfect plan had fractured. Casimir could have told her. It fractured the moment she underestimated an Omega desperate enough to fight back. Jaxon moved to Casimir's side, cut the zip ties with his knife. gentle, careful. Elijah, Casimir asked, voice shaking. Safe, sleeping, waiting for you. Jackson's hand hovered near Casimir's face, not touching, just close. I'm sorry for everything. For not believing you, for letting them take him, for 6 months of... Stop, Casimir's voice cracked. We don't have time for apologies. We have 43 families who need answers, 43 Omegas who deserve the same second chance we got. Jackson's jaw clenched. We'll find them, all of them. And the people on that list. Already being arrested? Terrence appeared beside them. Federal warrants were issued 20 minutes ago, every name, every location, no one's getting away. Casimir's legs finally gave out, exhaustion and adrenaline crash hitting simultaneously. Jackson caught him before he hit the floor, lifted him with the same careful precision he'd used with Elijah hours earlier. I've got you, Jackson said quietly, I've got both of you. Casimir wanted to argue, wanted to insist he could walk, but his body had been running on nothing but fear and survival instinct for 6 months, and it was finally admitting defeat. He let Jackson carry him off the plane. Reporters waited outside the terminal, cameras, questions shouted over each other, federal agents forming a barrier between them and the chaos. But Casimir only saw one thing. Terrence standing near a black SUV, holding a carrier. Inside, a baby with dark curls was starting to wake up. Elijah. Jackson set Casimir down carefully, let him find his balance, then stepped back. Giving him space, giving him choice, not commanding, not controlling. Just waiting. Casimir crossed the distance on shaking legs, looked into the carrier, at his son's face, at the eyes that were starting to open and focus. Elijah saw him. And smiled. Not gas, not reflex, real recognition, the kind of biological certainty that transcended paperwork and lies and 6 months of manufactured death. Casimir lifted him out of the carrier, held him close, felt the weight of his son against his chest where he belonged, where he should have been from the beginning. Elijah made a soft sound, content safe home. Casimir's tears fell silently onto dark curls. 6 months of grief and rage and survival compressing into one moment of perfect, impossible relief. Jackson's hand touched his shoulder, gentle, tentative. We're going somewhere safe, Jackson said quietly, somewhere they'll never find us, and then we're going to figure out what comes next. What comes next? Casimir looked up. You really think there's a next after all of this? I know there is, Jackson's voice stayed steady, because we're both still breathing and so is he, that means we won. Casimir looked back at Elijah, at the baby who'd been stolen, hidden, used as leverage in a game he never asked to be part of. We didn't win, Casimir said quietly, we survived, there's a difference. Then we'll figure out how to do more than survive. Jackson's hand tightened slightly on Casimir's shoulder, together, if you'll let me. Together, the word felt foreign, dangerous, like hopping for something that had already been destroyed once and might shatter again under pressure. But Elijah reached for Jackson. Tiny hand stretching toward the alpha who'd spent 6 hours trying to comfort him, whose scent he recognized, whose presence meant safety even when biology insisted Casimir was home. Jackson took Elijah carefully, held him with both arms, and for the first time since boarding that plane, he looked like something other than a predator barely restrained. He looked like a father. We're going to dismantle every network Selene built, Jackson said, find every Omega, return every child, and make sure the people who signed that list never touch another family. That's going to take years, Casimir said. Good thing we have time. Sirens wailed in the distance, more federal vehicles arriving, more arrests happening across the city as the operation Selene had built collapsed under the weight of exposure. But in the quiet space between chaos, 3 people stood together. An alpha who'd learned that power meant nothing without trust. An Omega who'd survived 6 months of erasure and refused to stay invisible. And a baby who'd brought them back together by refusing to forget what biology already knew. Terrence approached with a tablet. Sir, we've got confirmation. Judge Marlowe was arrested in Monaco, 3 hospital administrators in custody. The doctor who signed the fake death certificate is cooperating. In Dante, Jackson asked. Federal holding singing like a bird. Terrence's expression hardened. He's giving up everyone, names, locations, financial routes, everything. Jaxon nodded slowly. Keep him alive long enough to testify. After that, he stopped, looked at Casimir. After that, we'll decide together. Together, there was that word again. Casimir's phone buzzed, the burner he'd been carrying for 6 months. He pulled it out. Unknown number, text message. Thank you for not letting them win. You saved my daughter too. Anonymous. Casimir stared at the screen, then another message came through, different number. You gave me hope when I had none left. My son is coming home because of you, M. Then another. They told me my baby was dead. You proved they were lying. Thank you, K. Messages kept coming, different numbers, different stories, all connected by the same thread. Omegas who'd been told their children were gone, who'd been erased and silenced, who were finally getting answers because Casimir had refused to stay hidden. 43 families. 43 second chances. They're thanking me, Casimir whispered. People I've never met, families I didn't even know existed. Jaxon read over his shoulder, his expression softened. You gave them what no one gave you, proof that fighting back matters. Elijah yawned, tiny face scrunching, still exhausted from hours of crying and sedation wearing off. He needs to eat, Casimir said, and sleep somewhere that isn't a plane or a warehouse. There's a safe house 20 minutes from here. Jaxon shifted Elijah carefully back into Casimir's arms. Medical staff, security, everything you need. And after that, we rebuild. Jaxon's voice stayed steady, the right way, with truth instead of secrets, with trust instead of commands. Casimir wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that this wasn't just another beautiful lie that would collapse the moment pressure returned. But Elijah was warm against his chest, real, breathing, alive despite everything designed to erase him. Sometimes survival was enough. Sometimes hope came later. The SUV pulled up, doors opened. Terrence moved to provide cover while they climbed inside. Casimir settled into the backseat with Elijah. Jaxon sat across from them, close enough to protect, far enough to give space. The vehicle pulled away from the airport. Away from reporters and federal agents and the wreckage of an operation that had destroyed 43 families before finally being exposed. Casimir looked down at his son, at the face he'd been told he'd never see, at the life someone had tried to sell like he was nothing more than inventory. I'm never letting you go again, Casimir whispered, no matter what. Elijah's hand curled around his finger, tiny, strong, holding on with the same desperation Casimir felt. Jaxon's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, expression shifting. We've got a problem. Casimir's stomach dropped. What now? The list. Jaxon turned the screen toward him. There are more names hidden deeper, encrypted. 17 people signed off on clear line, but the operation itself has roots going back 15 years. How many more? We don't know yet, Jaxon's jaw clenched, but Selene wasn't the architect, she was just management. The weight of those words settled like lead in Casimir's chest. They'd stopped one operation, saved 43 families, arrested 17 conspirators. But the network itself, the system that had been trafficking Omegas and children for over a decade, was still intact somewhere, hidden, waiting. So this isn't over, Casimir said quietly. No, Jaxon met his eyes, but we're not alone anymore, and neither are they. The safe house appeared through tinted windows, concrete walls, armed security, medical personnel waiting by the entrance. Temporary safety, not permanent. Never permanent in a world where people with money and power thought Omegas were property and children were commodities. But for now it was enough. Casimir climbed out of the SUV with Elijah sleeping against his chest. His body ached, his mind screamed for rest, but underneath exhaustion and fear something else burned. Fury. Not the hot, explosive kind, the cold, calculated rage that lasted, that built, that refused to forget. 43 families had gotten answers today. But how many more were still trapped in systems designed to erase them? How many more Omegas were being told their bobbies were dead while someone profited from their grief? Casimir looked at Jaxon. I want to help find them, all of them. You need to rest first. I've been resting for 6 months. Casimir's voice stayed steady despite shaking hands. Hiding, surviving, waiting for permission to exist. I'm done waiting. Jaxon studied him, alpha assessment, looking for weakness or instability or signs that Casimir would break under pressure. He wouldn't find any. Because Casimir had already been broken, been destroyed, been erased so thoroughly that coming back from the dead felt like walking through walls made of paper. Okay, Jaxon said finally, we do this together, but you set the pace, you say when it's too much. Deal. They walked into the safe house side by side. An Alpha who'd learned that control wasn't the same as protection. An Omega who'd learned that survival was just the beginning. And between them, a baby who'd proven that biology didn't forget, even when powerful people tried to rewrite it. Somewhere in the world, encrypted servers held the names of people who'd been operating trafficking networks for 15 years. Somewhere, Omegas were still being told their children were dead. Somewhere, families were still being destroyed by systems designed to profit from their pain. But for the first time in 6 months, Casimir wasn't facing it alone. And that made all the difference. This is just the beginning of Casimir and Jaxon's fight for justice. With 43 families